Let's look at the verb haber. What a verb. It has a number of uses and it changes in some of the conjugations. And you have seen it before at this stage. Haber in the indicative mood expresses a couple of things. You have seen it used meaning there is or there are. And when you have seen it like this, it uses I. It's conjugated as I. Hay un libro en la mesa. There is a book on the table. Hay unos libros en la mesa. There are some books on the table. But when we want to say have done something, I have gone to the store, I have studied, then it has the meaning to have. And we use it in this way. Ellos han comido el pan. They have eaten the bread. Now this have is different than tener. We don't use the verb tener when we want to express a past action that has happened, such as I have eaten the bread. We would not say ellos tienen comer el pan. So when we're using it with the past participle of comer as comida, then we use the verb haber. So haber actually has two functions in the indicative mood. One, as you've seen here, means there is or there are when we're talking about the quantity of something. Hay un libro en la mesa. Hay unos libros en la mesa. Its other function is to use it with the past participle. For example, comer, comida. Those are the ito, auto endings to the verbs. And then it has a conjugated form, which we're going to be going over. The interesting thing about haber is its function. How does it function in relationship to other verbs? And we'll be looking at that as well. The pre-present or present perfect. In most books, it's called present perfect. In Spanish, it's known as antepresente, which means slightly before the present. Let's look at how haber is used to put something slightly before the present. Ellos han hablado con el profesor. They have spoken with the professor. These are the present tense indicative forms of haber. Yo he hablado, I have spoken. Tú has hablado, you have spoken. Él, ella, usted ha hablado. He, she, or you formal have spoken. Nosotros hemos hablado. We have spoken. Ellos, ellas, ustedes han hablado. You all have spoken. This is the present tense form of haber when we're using it as have done something. The pre-past or past perfect, as it's talked about in some books. And in Spanish, it's called antepretérito. In other words, an action that occurs slightly before something in the past. We say in English, had. For example, ellos habían hablado con el profesor. They had spoken with the professor. Notice that this is in the past tense, and therefore the past indicative forms of haber are as follows. Yo había hablado, I had spoken. Tú habías hablado, you had spoken. Él, ella, usted había hablado, he or she or you formal had spoken. Nosotros habíamos hablado, we had spoken. Ellos, ellas, ustedes habían hablado, you guys had spoken. There is also a future perfect, as it's talked about in some grammar books, or pre-future. In Spanish, some books talk about it as ante futuro. This is one we would say in English, will have. Para el jueves próximo, Ellos habrán hablado con el profesor. By next Thursday, they will have spoken with the professor. So you would use then the future indicative forms of haber as follows. Yo habré hablado. I will have spoken. Tú habrás hablado. You will have spoken. Él, ella, usted habrá hablado. He, she, you formal will have spoken. Nosotros habremos hablado. We will have spoken. Ellos, ellas, ustedes habrán hablado. Use guys, will have spoken. Now notice that there's two things going on in the future here. Haber still has the function of being have, as we saw before. I have spoken, I had spoken. But now in the future, since it's the future form, it's will have spoken. So putting it in the future gives it that will have. What does haber do, though, as a pre-present? That almost sounds like it would be past, wouldn't it? If something happens before the present, if it's pre-present, then we would assume it's the past. But what haber does, just like it does in English, is it divides time. As past, present, and future divide time of any action for us and in any language, let's look at the present for a minute. If we're talking about something happening in the present, still there are things that might impinge on the present, which happened slightly before. So it constructs kind of a sequential action in the present. Let's take a look. Someone comes up to you and says, ¿Has estudiado? Have you studied? And you say, sí, tengo un examen. I have an exam. And the action is happening right now. I have an examination before. But the question says, have you studied prior to right now? In other words, recently in the past. ¿Has estudiado? Have you studied? Sí, tengo un examen. Yes, I have an exam and he estudiado. And I have studied. So you see how haber throws the action still in the present tense, slightly before, but still relevant to the present tense. Have you studied prior to this moment? Yes, I have studied, and right now I have an examination. So haber makes it still in the present tense, therefore we use present tense haber with the past participle. The use of haber creates a pre-present time of action before the main verb, which here is tengo. I have an examination today. Have you studied? Yes, I have studied. He estudiado. What does haber do in the past? Well, let's say the examination was yesterday. ¿Habías estudiado? Had you studied for your test? In English, we would say, did you study? Had you studied? Sí, tuve un examen. Notice that main verb. Yes, I had a test. Had you studied for it? Let's say it's Wednesday and the exam was on Tuesday, the day before. Yes, I had studied for it. Notice that the past tense of haber in the indicative throws the action from the past. This is something that's happened in the past now. Notice the highlighted timeline on the bottom of the page. To something that happened before. Had you studied prior to the test, which happened in the past? Yes. So the main action happened, but before that, I had studied. So your answer would be, sí, tuve un examen y había estudiado. Yes, I had an exam and I had studied prior to that. So we see here that haber throws the action before the main action that already happened. So that's what haber is doing in the present tense, right now, and also in the past. It subdivides the past and puts a prior action really close to what the main tense of the verb is. In this case, tener is in the preterite. It's in the past tense. So you would use past tense haber with the participle habías estudiado. The use of haber creates a pre-past time of action. In other words, something that happened in the past, but with haber slightly before, it creates a sequential action. What happened first? I had studied. Then I had the exam. Well, what happened in the present that we saw before, and right now in the past, also happens in the future. Look at what haber does for the future. Say we're talking about a future action which will not take place yet because it's future, and we can only exist in the present thanks to metaphysics and time. But this person asking you the question is wondering about Friday. Now, today is Wednesday, let's say, and you're talking about a test that's going to happen on Friday. ¿Habrás estudiado para viernes? Will you have studied by Friday? Remember, we're Wednesday, and we're talking about 2 days from now. And so it's talking about will you have studied? So by the time Friday comes, will you have already studied? Sí, tendré un examen este viernes. Yes, I will have an exam this Friday, and the main action will happen in the future, but before that comes the question. Will you have studied by Friday? Yes, I will have an exam on Friday, and para jueves, by Thursday, habré estudiado. I will have studied. Notice that phrase right there. Sí, tendré un examen este viernes. Okay, I will have an exam this Thursday, but prior to that, still in the future, by Thursday, habré estudiado. I will have studied. Notice that the main tense of the verb, the definite verb action is right there in the middle. I will have a test. So haber throws this will have studied slightly before it in a timeline for the future. Haber throws the action before the main action that will happen. The use of haber creates a pre-future time of action. Let's look at it all together, past, present, and future, in the indicative mood. Tengo un examen hoy, right now. I have an exam today. Yo he estudiado, porque tengo un examen hoy. I have studied, because I have an exam today. Notice the sequence of action, but it's still in the present tense. Yo he estudiado comes first, porque tengo un examen hoy. Now let's move to the past. Tuve un examen ayer. I had an exam yesterday. But prior to that, yo había estudiado. So I will say, yo había estudiado porque tuve un examen ayer. I had studied because I had an exam yesterday. So it shows again sequence of action. Haber putting the action of estudiar slightly before the time that the exam was had. And let's jump to the future. I will have an exam. Tendré un examen. But what will you have done slightly before that? Para jueves habré estudiado. I will have studied, porque tendré un examen. So the function of haber in all three of these, past, present, and future, throws the action slightly before the action of the main verb. And when I say main verb, I'm talking about a solid tense, like present, tengo, I have, or past, tuve, I had. or future, tendré, I will have. Now, haber is also used in the subjunctive mood, meaning the possibility mood, right? Uh, in later chapters in most grammar books, the indicative switches then to the subjunctive. In haber, in the subjunctive mood, follows the same set of rules as we just saw, except they are used in subjunctive conjugations. So haber still throws the action of the verb slightly before. Here is the conjugations for the present subjunctive and the past subjunctive. Present subjunctive, yo haya hablado. Tú hayas hablado. Ella, él, usted haya hablado. He, she, you, formal, have studied. Nosotros hayamos hablado. Ellos, ellas, ustedes hayan hablado. Now notice, if I say I have studied, well, that's the same as we saw before. Yo he hablado and yo he hablado. But remember that the rules for the subjunctive indicate that the subjunctive means a potential action of happening. So even though it's expressed as have, the rules, which you should have studied by now for using the subjunctive mood, mean that the subjunctive form has to be used. If you've not gotten to the subjunctive mood yet, either disregard this part of the PowerPoint or go back and review the rules for using the subjunctive. The past or the imperfect subjunctive is as follows. Yo hubiera hablado, tú hubieras hablado, él, ella, usted hubiera hablado, nosotros hubiéramos hablado, ellos, ellas, ustedes hubieran hablado. The future subjunctive is no longer in use. Yo hubiere, tú hubieres, él hubiere, nosotros hubiéremos, ellos hubieren, is really an archaic form which is not used or very infrequently used perhaps in some sections of Spain. It is used in the King James equivalent version of the Spanish Bible, La Reina Valera. Altogether, let's look at the subjunctive. Now, this is a statement that needs to be followed by the subjunctive. Me alegro de que. Remember, if you have already studied your subjunctive rules, that when you're expressing an emotion about something is one rule, which means that whatever follows, it has to be in the subjunctive. So, ipso facto, right? It's got to be subjunctive that's going to follow here. Me alegro de que. I am happy that you have come to the party, let's say. I can't say tú has venido, you have come. I have to use the subjunctive because of the rule that it's following an emotive statement. Tú hayas venido. So, haber is doing the exact same thing as it did in the indicative. It throws the action slightly before, but now we have to follow subjunctive rules because me alegro de que, I am happy that tú hayas venido. Notice that haber still throws the action slightly before, and therefore it needs to take subjunctive because of the rule regarding emotion. Let's go to the past. Me alegré de que, I was happy. Now I want to say that you had come to the party. I can't use había. We have to use subjunctive because of the rule. Me alegré de que tú hubieras venido. I am happy, I was happy that you had come to the party. Notice the exact same thing as it has done throughout this PowerPoint. Haber throws the action slightly before. The only change is that it's in the past tense, and it has to agree past tense subjunctive because of the rule of following an emotive statement. I was happy. Now there is no future form, so we don't have to worry about that. We just went through that in the last slide. So what you're looking at here is the exact same thing that we saw a few slides ago. And that being, let me go back there just for a minute. Okay, we have to go through all that. Just like in the indicative, there's no rule that applies to tengo un examen hoy, so we use the indicative of haber, yo he estudiado. But because me alegro de que is an emotion statement, then we have to use the subjunctive of haber. Now, haber can be used also in conditional phrases, and when we use it conditionally, it has the sense would have. I would have gone to the store, but I didn't have money. Los estudiantes habrían hablado con el profesor, pero llegaron tarde. The students would have spoken with the professor, but they arrived late. So just like the future of haber, when we say yo habré, tú habrás, which we saw before, meaning will have, the conditional expresses would have. It expresses a condition. The conditional forms of haber are yo habría hablado, I would have spoken, tú habrías hablado, you would have spoken, él, ella, usted habría hablado, he, she, you formal would have spoken, nosotros habríamos hablado, we would have spoken, ellos, ellas, ustedes habrían hablado, you guys would have spoken. So in setting up conditional phrases using haber, let's start simply with the word si. Notice there's no accent on it, and therefore si means if. Si with an accent means yes. Si without an accent means if. So we have basically three different clauses with si that we can use. Right now, or in the past, expressing possibility or expressing impossibility. So let's take a look at one. Si ellos me invitan, yo iré al cine. If they invite me, I will go to the movies. There's no use of haber here, obviously. It's a condition in the present tense. It expresses a high likelihood of happening. If they invite me, I will go, meaning right now. Si ellos me invitan, present tense, yo iré al cine, future. But then they can also make one which is a contrary to fact condition. Si ellos me invitaran, past subjunctive, yo iría al cine. If they were to invite me, I would go to the movies. This is called a contrary to fact condition. It's in the present tense, but it expresses a very low likelihood of happening. In other words, it's probably impossible, but they could invite me, but I doubt that they will. Notice that instead of using present tense, invitar, there's past tense subjunctive. The formula is si, if, plus past subjunctive, plus conditional. I would go. The last of these is when we are going to use haber. Si ellos me hubieran invitado, yo habría ido al cine. If they had invited me, I would have gone to the movies. Now, when I say it in English, you hear the time. It's past, isn't it? They didn't invite him. They didn't go to the movie theater. It's a contrary to fact condition, but it happened in the past. Notice the use of haber throws the action in the past. It expresses impossibility of happening because it is past time. So haber is used in the past tense of the subjunctive, hubieran invitado, if they would have invited me. Yo habría ido, I would have gone to the movie theater. Notice how the time is expressed in each of these. And in the very last one, haber throws it slightly before the past, but meaning in it communicating the impossibility of action. This is explained further, these conditional phrases, in the other PowerPoints on the subjunctive.